The phone that rings once. Welcome back to the Storyteller's Moon, where love burns bright and shadows linger close. If you enjoy original, romantic, and chilling tales, please like this video, tap subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss the next story. Tonight's tale begins with something small, an object you've seen before, something harmless, something ordinary, a telephone. But not every ring should be answered. This is the phone that rings once. Part 1. The thing he shouldn't have bought. The flea market wasn't fancy. It never was. Just a sprawl of folding tables set up on the cracked asphalt of an abandoned lot. The air heavy with the smell of fried dough, old oil, and rain-soaked cardboard. Jalen didn't come here to buy anything in particular. He never did. He came because it was the only place that made him feel less like a ghost drifting through his own weekends. The aisles were lined with the detritus of 100 half-lived lives, a box of VHS tapes with no labels, plastic tubs of worn baby shoes, porcelain figurines with chipped noses, a stack of yearbooks from schools that had probably been torn down by now. Jalen drifted through the crowd with his hands in his jacket pockets, shoulders hunched. He'd always had a weakness for objects with weight, things other people had decided weren't worth keeping anymore. Last month, it had been a brass key with no lock. The month before, a set of postcards from places he'd never been. They sat on his bookshelf, silent company for the nights when his one-bedroom apartment seemed too big for him alone. At the far end of the lot, past the vendors selling cell phone cases and knockoff sneakers, he saw it. The table looked almost bare, except for a crate of mismatched dishes, a chipped lampshade, and the rotary phone. Beige plastic, the color of old bone. Its body sat heavy on the table, the receiver resting in its cradle as if waiting. The rotary dial bore tiny scratches from decades of use, and the cord curled in on itself like a sleeping snake. Jalen stopped walking. The seller, an older woman with skin the shade of walnut and eyes that missed nothing, followed his gaze. $10, she said flatly. He stepped closer, lifting the phone. It was heavier than he expected, solid, dense, like it had swallowed every word ever spoken through it. He pressed the receiver to his ear. Nothing but silence. Not the thin, digital silence of a cell phone, but a thicker kind. It felt like standing in a church after everyone had left. On the bottom, a crack ran across the base. Just beside it, carved faintly into the plastic, were 3 short lines. Double vertical bar, not decoration, not random, deliberate. "What's this?" he asked. The woman shrugged. "Came like that. Does it work as much as these things do? Adapters in the box." She pointed to a cardboard shoebox beneath the table. He should have set it down, walked away. He didn't need it. Nobody needed a rotary phone in 2025, but he couldn't. His thumb brushed over the carved notches again. The woman tilted her head, her gaze sharpening. "Be careful what you bring home," she said quietly. "Heavy things, remember." Jalen forced a laugh, though the sound felt wrong in his throat. "Guess I'll risk it." He handed over a crumpled $10 bill. The woman wrapped the phone in old newspaper and slid it across the table. For the rest of the walk home, the weight of it in his bag pulled at his shoulder, heavier than 10 pounds of plastic had any right to be. His apartment sat above a barber shop that closed by 7. At night, the street below emptied, leaving him in silence broken only by the hum of the fridge and the occasional slam of a car door outside. The place wasn't much. Bare walls, thrift store couch, a kitchen table too small for company. He never had, but it was his. Jalen set the phone on the counter and unboxed the adapter. It took him 20 minutes and 2 YouTube tutorials to figure out how to connect it to his router. When he lifted the receiver, a low dial tone hummed in his ear. Not digital, real. He smiled despite himself. Strange to hear that sound again. He spun the rotary wheel once, just to feel the resistance, the tick, tick, tick as it spun back. The motion stirred something faint in him, a memory of his grandmother's kitchen phone. Back when calling someone meant patience, the phone didn't belong in his sleek little kitchen. It looked like it had been transplanted from another life, a relic refusing to be forgotten. He made ramen with an egg stirred in, ate standing up, then crashed onto the couch with his laptop. The day caught up to him, and he told himself he'd go to bed before midnight. At 11:58, he brushed his teeth. By 11:59, he was pulling the blanket up around his shoulders. At exactly 12 a.m., the phone rang. Once. The sound jolted through the apartment, sharp and deliberate. Jalen froze, waited for another ring. None came. He swung his legs off the couch and padded into the kitchen, every step loud in the silence. The phone sat in its corner, pale plastic gleaming in the faint streetlight. Slowly, he lifted the receiver. Hello? Only static. Then silence. He exhaled and hung up. His laugh came shaky. Line test, he muttered to himself. Just the system. But as he turned toward the hallway, he stopped cold. The bathroom light was on. He had turned it off. He was sure of it. The next day, Jalen tried not to think about it. He pushed through his shift at the logistics office, stared too long at spreadsheets, half ignored his sister's texts reminding him about Sunday dinner. By the time he got home, exhaustion had dulled the edge of unease. But at 11:59 p.m., he was wide awake, staring at the phone on the counter. When the clock struck midnight, it rang. Once. This time, he was ready. He lifted the receiver immediately. Hello? Static. Then a whisper, so close he nearly dropped the phone. Jalen. He swallowed hard. His name shouldn't sound like that. Like someone was pressing their lips to his ear. Who is this? He demanded. The whisper chuckled softly. You left the window open. Jalen turned sharply. The curtain stirred in the night breeze. The window was cracked an inch. He never left it open at night. His throat went dry. Wrong number, he muttered, and slammed the receiver back down. The bathroom light flicked on. He hadn't touched the switch. Part 2. The Voice That Knows. He slept with the hall light on, as if a cone of weak yellow could keep the dark from organizing itself. It didn't help. Every time he started to drift, he jerked awake. Sure he'd heard the soft weight of a receiver settling into its cradle. Sure he'd heard a single bell struck far away. Work the next day passed in a film. Numbers swam. The mouse click sounded like a metronome set a little too fast. He replied late to emails and earlier than usual to his sister, Keisha. Keisha, Sunday. Don't ghost me. Jalen. Wouldn't dream of it. Keisha. That what we're calling it now? Dreams? Jalen. Lowell, I'm good. Keisha. You're not, but fine. Bring yourself and an appetite. He typed thumbs up and stared at the tiny cartoon hand as if it might tell him how to be a person. By late afternoon, he had convinced himself the midnight ring had been a glitch, the bathroom light a mistake of his own tiredness. He stopped at the corner store for eggs and bread, and on the way up the stairwell smelled the barbershop's aftershave rising through the vents, menthol and powder, and the memory of Saturdays with his father, who taught him that a sharp hairline could sometimes make a bad week behave. He unlocked the apartment and froze. The phone sat where he'd left it. The line hung curled like a cat's tail. But the bathroom light was on again. He walked toward it slowly, refusing to blink, as if blinking invited rearrangement. He stood in the doorway like a bouncer and flipped the switch with 2 fingers. Off. He waited. Nothing turned itself back on. He exhaled through his nose. Not funny, he said to the empty place. The evening wore itself out. He made toast he didn't want, scrolled without reading, set the phone, his cell, not the rotary, face down on the table, as if that were a moral stance. 10:30 sagged into 11. He found himself sitting in the kitchen already, elbows on the table, looking at the beige block like a rival chess piece. At 11:58, he stood. At 11:59, he put his hand on the receiver as if to keep it from moving. When the clock clicked over, the phone rang once. He lifted it on reflex. Hello? Jalen. The whisper was softer tonight. Not timid exactly. Confident in the way of something that knows it won't be denied. Good evening. He swallowed. Who is this? You know, it said, indulgent. I don't. A patient pause. Then, conversationally, you still have your mother's old voicemail where she says, leave me a message if I love you. Do you remember? She recorded it on accident. She meant to say, if you love me, but she didn't. And you've kept the mistake like a pressed flower. Jalen shut his eyes and saw the waveform on his phone screen, the tiny blue mountain of his mother's warm voice. That's not. Anyone could guess. You warmed your hands over the kettle this morning, but didn't drink the tea. The whisper went on. Kind, almost. Your rent check is folded into fourths and tucked under the pepper shaker. You dropped a receipt near the door and left it because you couldn't stand to discover it wasn't anything worth keeping. He looked at the pepper shaker with its little chrome cap. He looked at the slip of paper on the floor that he had, in fact, stepped over twice. How do you see me? He asked. The whisper laughed. Small, pleased. You brought me home. He forced himself to stand where he was. Where are you? His voice came out thinner than he meant. In the place you left for me, it said, bright as a child answering correctly in class, in the switch between off and on, in the angle of the door, you always leave 2 inches open, in the curve of the cord. Jalen's eyes fell to the cord. It looked like any old coil, cheap plastic memory of movement. He imagined a pulse under it. Why are you doing this? He asked. So you'll listen. To what? To yourself, the whisper said, and the affection in it burned colder than cruelty. He realized his hand had tightened on the receiver. The bakelite bit into his palm. He loosened his grip. What do you want? To talk. He almost laughed. At midnight? That's when you're loneliest, it said, as if stating the weather. He hung up. The clack was satisfying, the definitive punctuation of a sentence ending. He set the receiver down slowly, almost apologetically. The phone did not ring again. He took 3 steps toward the hall. The bathroom light clicked on. He said a word into the empty apartment that he'd never let his mother hear. He marched to the switch and flipped it off. He didn't wait to see if it would switch itself back, because he couldn't bear the dilemma of hoping it wouldn't and needing it to. He slept on the couch again, with the hall light burning. In his chest, his heart kept a small, vigilant tempo. He woke at 3:07 a.m., with his name breathed into his ear like steam. He sat upright, fists up like a joke about fighting a dream. The apartment held its breath with him. Nothing moved. The hall light hummed. When he lay down again, he left one arm draped over the couch back, fingers resting on the edge of the table, as if to feel a tremor when it came. Morning didn't so much arrive as admit it had nowhere else to go. He showered too hot. He braced his palms against the tile and thought about calling Keisha, then pictured the look she'd give him that mixed the patience of big sisters with the triumph of I knew it. She would drive over with breakfast and common sense. She would stand in his kitchen and say things like, "You're not special. Lots of people are haunted." And he would have to laugh, which might break the thing loose from its current furniture and set it wandering new rooms. On the way out, he touched the phone the way you touch the hood of a car, flat palm, brief, like acknowledging a family member who often disappoints you. At lunch, he Googled rotary phone single ring midnight again and got the same chorus of answers: line tests, bad adapters, prank calls from the past, grief doing its uncanny best to become a mechanic. He closed his laptop and ate his sandwich. The bread had gone stale somehow, since yesterday. He chewed like it had wronged him. A new message from Keisha. I'm picking you up Sunday. No arguments. Also, there's a farmer's market. Don't act like you're too good for peaches. He typed, okay, then deleted it and typed, can't wait, because he didn't want her to read, okay, like surrender. He got home early to prove to himself that daylight made things ordinary. In full sun, the phone looked ridiculous, like a period costume at a bus stop. He opened the cupboard and set it inside, carefully, among canned tomatoes and a half-empty bag of rice. The door shut with a small, solid thud. He stood with his hand on the knob until his pulse settled beneath a number he didn't know by name. He ate eggs for dinner because Keisha had asked about eating, and eggs counted as adult food. He washed the pan and put it away, and did not turn on any lights he didn't strictly need. At 11:30, he brushed his teeth for too long, spit, rinsed, patted his face dry, like an actor in a commercial for good choices. At 11:59, he sat on the counter, feet on the lower cupboard like a kid. He told himself he would not move. If it rang in a box. At 12 a.m., from inside the cupboard, the phone rang. Once. The sound didn't muffle much. It found the joints of the cabinet and traveled along them like a rumor. Jalen laughed. It came out too high and stayed in his mouth like spare air. He turned the knob, opened the door, and looked at the beige block nestled among tomatoes. I hate you, he said conversationally, and lifted the receiver. Hello, Jalen. He didn't ask how. He didn't ask why. He said, what do you want to talk about? You, the whisper said, delighted. Always you. Today you stood at the office window and watched a man carry a mattress, alone. You decided it couldn't be done. You watched him do it anyway, and felt both wrong and relieved. He shut his eyes. The man's awkward ballet across the sidewalk replayed in perfect humiliating clarity. You still haven't thrown away the postcards from places you never went. The voice went on kindly. You tell yourself they are promises, but really they are forgiveness. He hung up. He did it gently this time, as if suddenness might be a cruelty. He set the receiver in the cradle, like tucking a child. He closed the cupboard door. He leaned his forehead against the wood, and the cool pressed back at him like a reasonable argument. He turned off the kitchen light. 3 steps down the hall, his bare foot paused on something not floor, paper. He bent and picked up the receipt by the door he'd been stepping over for 2 days. He smoothed it between his fingers and then, perversely, slid it into the junk drawer instead of the trash. When he looked up, the bathroom light was on again. Okay, he said into the empty air, like a referee who had decided to call the game. Okay. He flipped the switch. Off. He moved the little metal tab down a fraction, between on and off, because the whisper had mentioned that place, and he wanted the defiance of occupying it. He returned to the couch and lay on his side, eyes open, watching the doorway, as if something might choose it. The light stayed off. At 2:12 a.m., he fell asleep and dreamed about numbers that wouldn't add up because one of them had decided to be a letter. The next day, he bought batteries for a flashlight he hadn't used since the last winter power outage. He bought a cheap motion sensor light and stuck it in the hall, which made the apartment feel like a basement no matter what. He bought a little bell because some part of him had decided that if a thing was going to ring once, he might as well control which object did the ringing. He was making a ceremony of it. He knew. Humans did that with fear. Fetch the bowl and the matches and the little clean ritual to put the teeth on the right side of our mouths. He installed the bell on the inside of the closet door in his bedroom, a bit of twine through the loop, a tiny tarnished thing that made him feel clever. He left the door cracked the 2 inches he always left it. The whisper had named the habit, but naming didn't undo it. He stood and watched the gap for a minute, like a man checking whether the sky was still doing its job. He heated soup he didn't taste. He sat at the table without turning on music. He worked his way through an online form about renter's insurance and closed it when it asked an unlovely question about acts of God. At 11:57, he stood. At 11:59, his hand hovered over the cupboard door. He didn't open it. The phone could sit with the tomatoes. At 12 o'clock, the cupboard thudded softly, like a heartbeat recognized itself. The phone rang once. He opened the door and didn't pick it up. The whisper came through the crack like a draft. Jalen, it said, almost fond. Open the door. He looked at the apartment door. Solid, chain-latched, deadbolt sure. Why? He asked. So I can come in. He smiled, slow and ugly. No. The whisper laughed, delighted. Good. Then I'll let myself in. Behind him, in the bedroom, the bell on the closet door chimed. Just the barest kiss of sound, metal on metal, as if something inside had explored how hooks worked. He moved before he decided to move. The hall stretched longer than its small math said it should. He shouldered the bedroom door open. The closet stood as he'd left it, 2 inches open, a thin slice of clothes in the dark, like a lazy forest. The bell hung still. He reached and pushed the door shut, and the bell chimed proper, honest this time. Back in the kitchen, the cupboard door had swung wider. The receiver had slipped sideways in its cradle, as if a hand had set it down thoughtlessly. Tomorrow, the whisper said from the dark box. Don't be late. For what? He asked, breathless and childish. For the part where we stop pretending. The line clicked, not the old soft clack of a human hanging up, a tidy, modern click, as if the phone had learned new manners. Jalen closed the cupboard. He turned off the kitchen light, then turned it back on because courage is seasonal. He went to the couch and sat, hands on his knees, eyes on the hallway. The hall light hummed, gentle as bees. The bathroom light stayed off. In the bedroom, the bell hung without moving, which felt less like mercy than like suspense. He slept badly, which was becoming a kind of sleep. In the morning, a message waited from Keisha. Leaving at 1 on Sunday. We're doing brisket. Bring the phone you never answer. I'm tired of voicemails. He stared at the screen too long. The words bring the phone made his stomach lift and fall. He typed, can't wait, and sent it before he could edit himself back into a man who kept nothing. On his way out, he took the phone from the cupboard and set it back on the kitchen table. He didn't like the thought of it in the dark when he wasn't there, doing whatever phones did when unobserved. He smoothed the cord with 2 fingers, as if combing a child's hair. By the door, he paused and looked at the 3 carved notches on the phone's base. He had traced them with his thumb the first day. He traced them now. The plastic was warm. He pulled his hand back, held it in the air, as if he'd touched a stove. He walked out, locked the door, and stood on the landing with his keys pressed into his palm until the metal left a little colony of moons. On the sidewalk, the barber rolled his chairs out to sweep. Morning, the man said, a little surprised to see Jalen awake before noon on a Saturday. Morning, Jalen echoed, and for once it felt like a word he had borrowed and somehow made fit. He bought peaches at a stall because Keisha would ask. He bought a small plant because something in him wanted a thing that did a job that wasn't fear. He carried them home with the careful seriousness of someone balancing water. In the kitchen, he set the plant on the sill. It made the window look like a decision. He held a peach in his palm, the gentle weight of it, the promise of it. He put it down beside the phone, like an offering. At 12 o'clock that night, when the phone rang once, he didn't jump. He lifted the receiver and said, okay. The whisper breathed, satisfied. Tomorrow, it said, and the way it said the word made tomorrow feel like a place instead of a time. When? Jalen asked. It felt important to pretend schedules existed. Midnight, the voice said, in your bedroom. He thought of the bell, the way it had chimed like a mouth testing its teeth. And if I don't show up? You will, the whisper said, with such love that he understood the threat for what it was. The line clicked off. The apartment settled itself around him like a coat you don't like, but keep wearing because you can't afford another. Jalen set the receiver in its cradle and listened for the small thank you the phone never said. He stood in the doorway of his room and looked at the gap of the closet door and did nothing about it, because tonight there would be no fix that wasn't a door you could open from both sides. He turned off the hall light. He turned off the kitchen light. In the dark, the tiny green of the router blinked, a heartbeat that didn't belong to him. He lay down. He left his eyes open for a long time. When they finally closed, he dreamed of a ring that was also a key, and a key that was also a voice, and a voice that had his breath inside it already. And somewhere between his breathing and the clocks, a little bell moved, as if a thought had touched it. Part 3. The Invitation. Sunday came, and with it, Keisha's car horn outside the barber shop. Jalen climbed in, peaches in his lap. He tried to look normal. Keisha saw through him instantly. You look like you haven't slept since Thursday. I've been busy. Busy not sleeping? He chuckled weakly. Something like that. She drove them toward her house, talking about her kids' soccer game, about her husband trying to fix the dryer. Jalen answered in short bursts, but most of his mind was back in the apartment, back with the beige phone that sat waiting on his counter. At the dinner table, with brisket and mashed potatoes steaming, he managed to laugh at his nephew's knock-knock jokes. But every time a fork scraped a plate, he thought of a single ring splitting the silence. He heard it in his head, even here, safe under his sister's roof. Earth to Jalen, Keisha said at one point, tapping his hand. You've been staring at the salt shaker for 5 minutes. I'm fine, he lied. Uh-huh. She gave him a look that promised a later conversation. When she drove him home, she hesitated before he got out. If you need to talk about something, you know you can, right? Yeah, he said softly. I know. But he didn't tell her. He couldn't. If he said it out loud, it would anchor itself deeper. That night, back in the apartment, the silence pressed harder than ever. He sat at the table, staring at the phone. When midnight came, he lifted the receiver before it rang. Hello, he whispered. The voice was already there, pleased. I knew you'd be early. What do you want from me? To meet you. We've met. Not like this. The words sank into him. He realized with dread that the whisper had been building toward this moment, drawing him closer each night, like a spider tugging thread around prey. Where? He forced out. In your room. Midnight tomorrow. Open the door. Jalen's grip tightened. Why my room? Because that's where you dream. The voice chuckled softly. And I've been waiting for a long time. The line went dead. He set the receiver down and stared at the phone until dawn painted the walls, pale gray. The following day, he did everything wrong. He spilled coffee on his shirt. He crossed the street against the light and nearly got clipped by a car. He dropped his keys twice on the way upstairs. His nerves buzzed like a wire about to snap. Inside, the phone sat where he'd left it, as ordinary as ever. He moved it back into the cupboard. He told himself that would be enough. Out of sight. Contained. But when the clock struck midnight, the ring still came, once, clear, confident, as if the cupboard door wasn't even there. He opened it slowly, heart hammering. The phone sat still, its cord coiled neatly, but the receiver had shifted, angled as if someone had picked it up, spoken into it, and put it down again without care. Jalen whispered, No. The whisper came, not from the receiver this time, but from the room itself. Yes. The kitchen chair slid back 2 inches across the floor. The next day, Jalen stayed late at the office. He answered every email, stacked papers neatly, scrubbed data no one had asked him to clean, anything to avoid going home. When he finally did, the sky was already dark. He unlocked his apartment with his breath held. Nothing seemed different until he noticed the closet door in his bedroom. He always left it open 2 inches. Tonight, it stood wide, yawning black. Inside, the little bell he'd hung from twine lay on the floor. The string had been snapped. Jalen backed away, one hand braced against the wall. The phone in the kitchen rang once. He didn't answer. He sat on the couch, every muscle locked, staring at the hallway. The whisper didn't need the receiver anymore. It slid under the door frames, curled along the walls. Tomorrow, it breathed. Tomorrow we meet. He pressed his fists to his eyes until colors burst behind them. I don't want this. The laugh came, close enough to make his skin prickle. That's why it's beautiful. The bathroom light flicked on. Jalen buried his face in his hands and stayed there until the sun rose. Part 4. The last ring. Jalen avoided his apartment all day. He sat in a diner until the waitress started stacking chairs on tables. He walked circles around the block until his legs ached. But no matter how far he wandered, he knew where he'd end up. By 11:30, he was back on his couch, staring at the dark window. His apartment had never felt smaller. The phone sat on the kitchen table again, though he was certain, absolutely certain, he had left it in the cupboard that morning. At 11:59, his body was electric with dread. His hand shook against his thigh. When the clock turned over, the phone rang. Once. He didn't touch it. The receiver lifted itself. The plastic rose from the cradle and hovered in the air as if cradled by an invisible hand. The whisper spilled into the room, clearer than ever. Open the door. Jalen's eyes snapped to the front door. The deadbolt gleamed. The chain hung in its track. His voice cracked. No. The whisper chuckled, indulgent. Then I'll come in anyway. Behind him, the bedroom closet door creaked open. He bolted to his feet, heart slamming against his ribs. Stay away from me. The voice laughed. Jalen, I've never been away. The light in the bathroom flicked on, then off, then on again. The hall bulb buzzed and popped, plunging half the apartment into shadow. The closet door groaned wider. A smell drifted out, faint and wrong, like wet earth pressed into carpet. He stumbled backward until his calves hit the couch. His breath came sharp and shallow. The phone floated off the table, its cord dragging like entrails. It dangled in the air before him. The whisper purred. Answer me. I'm not touching you, Jalen whispered. You already did, the voice replied. The closet door slammed shut. The bell inside rang once, sharp as a scream. Jalen lunged for the front door, yanking at the locks with fumbling fingers. The deadbolt jammed. His keys clattered to the floor. Behind him, the phone thudded against the wall, the receiver still hanging in the air. The whisper shifted from gentle to sharp. Don't run from yourself. He whirled, fists balled, throat raw. What are you? For the first time, the whisper didn't laugh. It answered. I'm the part of you left behind. Every heavy thing you never let go of. Every voice you smothered. Every door you left cracked. You carried me home in your hands, The apartment seemed to close around him, walls pressing closer. Jalen's gaze fell to the phone's base, where it lay on the floor. His stomach lurched. The carved notches had grown. No longer 3, 4. The whisper spoke again. Reverent. The last one is tonight. He backed away, shaking his head. No, you don't decide that. Don't I? The voice stretched, expanding, filling the air with itself. Midnight is ours. You brought me home so you'd never be alone again. I don't want you. You do. You always did. You keep scraps of other people's lives. You hoard silence because it speaks back to you. You opened the door the moment you touched me. The phone cord slithered across the floor, wrapping around the leg of the table. The plastic body dragged itself upright, jerking like a marionette. The receiver, still suspended, pressed closer to his ear, though he had raised no hand. Jalen, the whisper said, almost tender. It's time. He fought the instinct to scream. He thought of Keisha, of Sunday dinners, and her hand steady on his. He thought of his mother's voicemail, the accident of the phrase, if I love you, that he replayed when he needed proof he wasn't unworthy. His chest ached. You're not me. I am the part that remembers. Heavy things always remember. The closet door banged open again. The smell of earth flooded out stronger. The phone's dial began to spin on its own. The wheel ticked back, clicking, numbers turning with mechanical patience. Jalen's voice broke. Stop. Answer me, the whisper breathed, and I'll be whole. The dial finished its spin. The bell inside the phone chimed. Once. Jalen grabbed the receiver with both hands, slammed it into the cradle. The clack reverberated like a gunshot. The apartment went still. He stood shaking, chest heaving, waiting. Silence. No whisper, no movement, no light flickering. The phone lay inert on the floor, cord coiled, plastic dull. For a moment, just a moment, he thought he had won. He didn't sleep. He sat on the couch until dawn, crept pale across the blinds. He told himself he'd take it to the dumpster, smash it with a hammer, drop it in the river. But when he rose, legs unsteady, and looked down at the phone, the notches had changed again. Not 4, 5. The next evening, Keisha tried calling. His cell buzzed on the counter. The voicemail picked up. Hey, it's Jalen. Leave me a message if I love you. Her laugh, confused, unsettled, was caught by the recording. Call me back, weirdo. You better be eating. She hung up. The beige phone on the kitchen table sat quietly in the dusk. At exactly midnight, it rang once. The receiver lifted by itself. No one was there to answer. Thank you for listening under the Storyteller's moon. If this tale made your skin crawl, please like the video, subscribe, and share it with a friend who loves a good scare. Until next time, keep your lights low and your imagination wide open.